in your syllabus is crude oil. It's and in this discussion I will be going to discuss the introduction, constitution and the general refining process of crude oil. The crude oil is an organic liquid substance often found below the earth's surface. It is made up of thousands of molecules composed of different hydrogen and carbon atoms, and these hydrogen compounds containing hydrogen and carbon atoms are called hydrocarbons. These hydrocarbons also contain different proportions of many impurities like oxygen, sulfur, nitrogen and heavy metal atom. The word petroleum is derived from the Latin word petra, which means rock, and oleum, which means oil. That is, petroleum means rock oil in terms of Latin. It is commonly used to refer the crude oil. That is, petroleum is commonly called crude oil, but it may also refer to other related hydrocarbons. That is, petroleum also refer to other hydrocarbons. Generally, the crude oil generally referred to petroleum. Some hydrocarbons are gaseous rather than liquid, and methane is the most common example of these hydrocarbon gases. This is the kind of natural gas that we most often use in our kitchens, in our home. Crude oil is highly inflammable and is an excellent source of energy. And the sister hydrocarbon of crude oil, which is called a natural gas, and this is also another source of energy. And the crude oil is a non-renewable energy source because it cannot be replenished. Crude oil is the central part of modern life. That is the world's most important energy resource, which is known as the crude oil. We rely on it many ways: for food we eat, the clothes we wear, and the electronics we use at home and in the workplace. Without this crude oil, we could not be able to continue to enjoy the same standard of living. The people live, work and travel all depends on this oil. Oil is in fact the world's most important transportation fuel. About 90% of all transportation fuels comes from the crude oil. But oil is also used to make medicines, plastics and cleaning product. In fact, modern life as we know it today would be impossible without oil and its product. Many of the everyday items people use are either made from oil or are dependent on the oil for their production. Some of these products include heating oil, jet fuel, kerosene, denatures, diapers, fertilizers, lipstick, shampoo, deodorant, shaving cream, crayons, musical devices, cameras, computers, glue, contact lenses, toothpaste, synthetic fibers, tires, artificial hairs and even aspirin. All these products are the derivatives of crude oil. So now you have an idea of how important the crude oil in our daily life. Next, what are the constituents of crude oil? Crude petroleum is made up of thousands of different chemical substances including gases, liquids and solids. The compounds in the crude petroleum oil are essentially hydrocarbons or substituted hydrocarbons in which the major elements are carbon, that is it contains 85 to 90%, and hydrogen 10 to 14%, and the rest with non-hydrocarbon elements like sulfur, nitrogen, oxygen, and organometallic compounds like nickel, vanadium, arsenic, lead, and other metals in trace amount, that is in ppm amount, that is. And also the crude oil contain inorganic salts of magnesium chloride, sodium chlorides, and other mineral salts that are also present in this crude oil. And also scientists identified more than 200 constituents in the crude petroleum oil. Let us discuss one by one. First one is aliphatic or open chain hydrocarbons. Crude oil contain group of hydrocarbons like paraffin, naphthalene, aromatics, olefins in different proportions. Except olefins, these are produced during the process of crude oil analysis. First one is paraffins. Paraffins are saturated hydrocarbons. Examples are methane, ethane, propane, butane, pentane, hexane with general formula CnH2n plus 2, where n is the number of carbon atoms in that compound. Paraffins are available both as normal and isoparaffins. Normal paraffins are straight chain compounds and isoparaffins are branched chain compounds. Most straight chain distillates of crude oil are predominantly normal paraffins, whereas isoparaffins are formed by the catalytic reforming, alkylation, polymerization, or isomerization processes. Next one is olefins. Olefins are unsaturated hydrocarbons, that is, these olefins contain double bond between the carbon atoms present in the molecule. The general formula is CnH2n, where and the lowest member of this homologous series is ethylene, that is C2H4. This series is known as alkenes. Olefins are not present in the crude oil, but they are produced by the thermal and catalytic decomposition or dehydrogenation of normal paraffins. Like paraffins, olefins may be straight chain or branched chain, that is normal or isohydrocarbons, normal or isoolefins. Next is ring compounds. First one is naphthenes. Naphthenes are cyclic saturated hydrocarbons with a general formula CnH2n. These are also known as cycloalkanes. Since they are saturated, they are relatively inactive like paraffins. These compounds are the second most abundant series of compounds that present in the crude petroleum oil. Examples are methyl cyclopentane, cyclohexane, dimethyl cyclopentane, and methyl cyclohexane. Lower members of naphthenes are good fuels. Higher molecular weight ones are predominant in gas oil and lubricating oils. Next one is aromatics or benzenoid series. These are chemically very active compared to other groups of hydrocarbons. They have the general formula CnH2n-6. These hydrocarbons in particular are attacked by the oxygen from the organic acids. Naphthenes can be dehydrogenated to aromatics in presence of palladium catalyst. Lower aromatics such as benzene, toluene, and xylenes are good solvents and precursors for many petrochemicals. Aromatics from petroleum products can be separated by the extraction with solvents such as phenol, furfurol, and diethylene glycol. In addition to this, crude oil contains some complex hydrocarbons. That is, there are a large number of hydrocarbons that do not fall into the category of paraffins, olefins, naphthenes, and aromatics, but may be combined group of two or more groups of paraffins, nitrogen, or aromatic hydrocarbons. By joining two or more naphthene rings or combining naphthene or aromatic rings, paraffin chains with aromatic rings, vast varieties of complex hydrocarbons may be formed. Examples of these include decalene, naphthalene, diphenyl, etc. Heavier fractions of crude oil contain three types of hydrocarbons: multinuclear aromatics, or polynuclear aromatics, and these are well known in the crude oil and its residual products. Polynuclear aromatics are the precursors of coke, which forms due to the thermal effect. In addition to this, there are non-hydrocarbons or heteroaromatic compounds that are present in the crude oil. They are common heteroaromatic hydrocarbons include sulfur, oxygen, nitrogen and metallic atoms. That is, heteroaromatic compounds of sulfur, oxygen, nitrogen and metallic atoms are present in the crude oil. First one is sulfur compounds. They are present in the crude oil as mercaptans, mono and disulfides as the general formula RSH, RS, RRS, R-, where R and R- are alkyl radicals. Mercaptans are very corrosive, whereas mono and disulfides are not as much as corrosive. Examples of cyclic sulfur compounds are thiophenes and benzothiophene. Hydrogen sulfide gas is associated with the crude oil that is dissolved, that is it is in the dissolved form, and it is released when it is heated. H2S, hydrogen sulfide gas, is corrosive at high temperature and in presence of moisture. So crude oil that contain large amount of hydrogen sulfide is called sour crude oil. In the light distillates of crude oil, sulfur may be present as hydrogen sulfide, mercaptans, thiophenes, but in heavier fractions of crude oil, it contains 80 to 90% of sulfur compounds. Nitrogen compounds are hydrocarbons that are usually found in heavier parts of crude oil. These are responsible for the color instability and poisoning of certain catalysts. Nitrogen in the petroleum fuels causes generation of oxides of nitrogen, which are also strong pollutants to the atmosphere. Oxygen compounds in the crude oil include naphthenic acid, phenols, cresols, which are responsible for corrosive activities in the crude oil. Metallic compounds like vanadium, nickel, lead, arsenic, etc. also found in the crude oil. Vanadium and nickel are found in the form of organometallic compounds in most of the crude oil, whereas metal atoms are distributed within the compounds in the complex form called polyporphyrines. Petroleum fuels containing these metallic compounds may damage burners, lines and walls of the combustion chambers. And the scientist who works in the field of petroleum products are called petroleum geoscientists, and these petroleum geoscientists explore the detective work of finding the crude oil, or in general, or finding the presence of oil in the different parts of the world. They look for signs that may indicate the presence of hydrocarbons underground and are responsible for determining the best places to drill. Geoscientists employ advanced technology and special tools like aerial photography, satellite pictures, and specialized machines that measure variations in the Earth's gravity and magnetic field to identify likely crude oil fields. Once the crude oil extracted from the ground, it is taken into a gathering center where the water, sand, and salts are removed. While there, natural gas is separated from the crude oil and then sent to the booster station. The oil is then pumped to storage tank before being sent to either a refinery for proper processing or to oil tankers for the shipment to elsewhere. Before going to the refining process, first we have to know some basic oil properties. I will not give a detailed account on it. I have mentioned some of the important properties of oil. Crude oil properties can vary widely depending on where the oil is found and under what condition it was formed. Its different physical properties are used to design the right kind of refineries, classify the oils, and determine the appropriate prices for it. For example, there are different types of West Texas Intermediate crude oil and Oman crude oil. And the properties of crude oil, that is include its density. It is called API gravity. API means it is named after American Petroleum Institute. That is API gravity, sulfur content, nitrogen content, and carbon residue and distillation range. And these generally include the general properties of oil, that is density, API, sulfur content, nitrogen content, carbon residue, and distillation range. API gravity is also very important. It is essentially a measure of density. It determines whether the specific crude oil has a higher or lower boiling range, that is distillate yield, which is important for separating and extracting the different parts or fractions of the crude oil. Different oil producing areas produce different kinds of crude oil, and depending on its mixture of hydrocarbons, crude oil can vary in color, composition, and constituency. It is quite common to classify the crude oil into different types of, and it is called in different grades. The following classify the common grades of crude oils. First one is light and heavy crude oil. Crude oil can be classified as light or heavy depending on its API gravity or its density. Generally the higher is its API gravity, the lower its density. Oil is lighter in color and has a thin constituency and flows usually contains less metals and sulfur compounds. It is known as light oil. Oil that contain high metal content and sulfur content is considered as low grade oil. It is generally too much carbon atoms and not enough hydrogen, and is more time consuming to produce and hard to refine. It is known as heavy oil. And also we can classify the oils as sour or sweet crude oil. Crude oil can be classified again as sour or sweet depending on the amount of sulfur it contains. Oil with high sulfur content, that is more than 5% or more than 5% of weight in the sulfur, it is considered as sour crude oil. And whereas sweet crude oil on the other hand contain a lower content of sulfur element. Next we have to discuss the refining process of crude oil. The process through which crude oil is purified and treated to remove unusable substances is called refining. This process is also used to separate the oil into different usable petroleum products. All this takes place in the oil refinery. All refineries perform three basic functions. That is, in refineries, the main basic functions are separation, conversion, and treatment. First one is separation. In this phase, the refinery heats crude oil to different temperature levels. Different parts of the crude oil have different boiling points. As the temperature rises, these different parts or fractions are separated. This is done inside a distillation towers. The lightest fractions, which include gasoline and liquefied petroleum gas or LPG, that vaporizes quickly and rises to the top of the distillation towers. These are condensed back to its liquid forms. The medium weight fractions, which include kerosene and diesel oil, distillates contents in the middle portions of the distillation tower. The heaviest liquid called residual oils have highest boiling points and leave through the bottom of the distillation tower of the refining processes. Refining methods are constantly being improved. A variety of complex operations are now used which have improved their output. Refineries today turn more than half of every barrel of crude oil into gasoline. And this picture shows a schematic representation of the crude oil distillation. Then once it is separated, we have to convert it into different products. In the conversion phase, high temperature and pressure is applied as well as chemical catalysts are used to crack or split the heavy hydrocarbon molecules into smaller one. And this is the most widely used conversion method, and it is called cracking. That is, cracking is a conversion of heavier hydrocarbons into smaller one in presence of temperature, pressure and chemical catalyst. This is carried out in a cracking unit which consists of a reactor with a thick wall and a network of large furnaces, dividers and compartments. Other refining processes can rearrange hydrocarbon molecules rather than simply splitting them, while the other processes clean them impurities like sulfur. It is called desulfurization, which are harmful to the environment. Refineries also treat waste product by the produced during the refinery process. This helps to minimize the air and water pollution. Modern refineries are equipped with advanced pollution control systems. They purify wastewater, remove the chemicals and capture the emissions of gases and toxic materials. An oil refinery is a network of interconnected buildings and plants which are pre-treated and divided into different parts or fractions. These fractions are then converted, treated further and blended to produce specific oil products according to the preset specifications. Next, the treatment of the converted product. The final phase is the treatment. In these steps, the fractions produced during the separation are treated to improve their quality. They are then blended with other elements to produce the fine products. A variety of products can be made from the crude oil, including gasoline, jet fuel, kerosene, diesel and petroleum coke. The different products are later placed in a large storage tank until they can be delivered to places such as gas stations, airports and chemical plants. In addition to fuel oils, refineries can produce other oil-based products like asphalt, cleaning product, paints and even some of the components used to make chewing gum and diapers. Please note that the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries is an intergovernmental organization currently made up of 12 oil exporting companies that work together to coordinate the petroleum policies. That is, OPEC is called Organization of Petroleum Exporting Companies. References: Fundamentals of Petroleum and Petrochemical Engineering, Uttam Ray Chowdhury, CRC Press, Taylor Francis Group, Shrivers Chemical Processes Industries, George T. Austin, McGraw-Hill International Editions, Industrial Chemistry, B.K. Sharma, Jewel Publishing House, Krishna Prakash Media Private Limited, Meerut, India, and I Need to Know, an Introduction to Oil Chemistry, OPEC Secretariat, Public Relations and Information Department,